Every avoidant has 3 major breaking points. Now, these are the moments they can no longer ignore their emotions, moments where they regret losing you, moments where their defense systems fail. This is what I'm calling the avoidant breakdown triangle. Here's how it works. At each point of the triangle, we're going to list a moment or an idea, sort of like a trigger for an avoidant, one that makes their walls lower. And let's start up top with what I'm calling the phantom bond paradox. All right, so you may have noticed lately that I've been talking a lot about avoidant relationships with phantom exes, or as I've recoined, Frankenstein exes. Basically, the avoidant has this part of their brain where they store the best moments of all of their relationships, and they create a make-believe person out of those best moments. It's nothing more than a deactivation strategy to ensure that no one gets close. But there's something else happening beneath the surface. So let's say an avoidant just broke up with you. The common belief most people have is that the avoidant doesn't want them, that they're just going to move on. But here's the thing. Avoidants don't just move on after a breakup. I mean, they do at first, but they don't. They're really complicated. They create what I like to call a phantom bond, a mental projection of you that remains frozen in time. It's super similar to the Frankenstein X phenomenon, but there is a slight difference. Where the Frankenstein X is about specific qualities or moments that they're trying to capture and put on the shelf, the phantom bond is wholly about you. And the fact that they do this creates a paradox. All right. So here's what we know. Avoidants reject real-time intimacy, but they replay past relationships in their heads, romanticizing them on their terms. They push you away in reality, yet their private moments, well, that's when they let themselves feel the connection, but only when it's safe, i.e., you're not actively in their life. So they convince themselves that they don't need you, all while keeping you psychologically alive in their minds. Now, this works perfectly for them until reality disrupts their fantasy. All right, so before you see a list of 3 things. We're going to call these the phantom bond disruptors. And it's these 3 things in conjunction with the idea of the phantom bond that causes the avoidant to break. So let's start at the top. You change in a way that they never expected. So avoidants always assume the version of you they remember is static. When they see you evolve, thriving, different, even unrecognizable, it shatters their phantom bond. This is why an avoidant can seem indifferent for months and then suddenly react when you do something completely unexpected, like get into a new relationship or have a major life change. The next thing is they realize someone else now has access to you. So their brain was keeping you on this shelf, right? And the moment they see someone else experiencing the version of you they once had, their mind panics. The paradox kicks in. I didn't want them when I had them, but I don't want anyone else to have them either. And this is when the illusion of control fails. So avoidants cope by believing they have a mental door they can walk through if they ever decide to return. When that door slams shut because you've moved on in a way that feels irreversible, well, it causes a psychological panic. This is when an avoidant is most likely to reach out impulsively, not necessarily to get back together, but to check if the phantom bond is still intact. All right, so how does that look in real life? Well, they can bring up old memories out of nowhere. Remember when we went to that one place? They reach out over something trivial, which is kind of an excuse to contact you. They react emotionally to seeing you with someone else, even if they've already moved on. They can suddenly become nostalgic in a way that's uncharacteristic of them. And really, the phantom bond paradox is a delayed breakdown. They thought they were fine. They believed they had control over the loss. And then one day they realized the person they kept in their mind didn't exist anymore. And they weren't prepared for that. This is Jessie. A few years ago, she was exactly where you are right now, wondering if she had lost the love of her life for good. The man she thought she'd marry was gone, and no matter what she tried, nothing was working. But then, something changed. She found a roadmap, one that gave her a clear plan, step by step, to not only get her avoidant back, but to turn their relationship into something even stronger.
If I hadn't had a specific plan and roadmap, we would not be together today, because I didn't have the tools otherwise to approach it in a very strategic and intentional way.
And now, that same man is her husband. Jessie isn't an exception. She's proof that the right strategy works. That's why I built the Seiter Super Offer. So you don't have to guess, so you don't have to waste months or even years stuck in a cycle that never works. Now, right now, for YouTube viewers only, I'm giving you everything you need to get results like Jessie's. My complete course library, a private community, weekly live streams. Now, normally I sell all of these things separately, but today you're going to get everything at 50% off, a one-time payment of $97. No monthly fees, no hidden costs, just everything you need to make your avoidant regret losing you and reignite their obsession. So, if you're interested, click the link in the description below and start your transformation today. All right, let's move over to this point of our triangle. I'm calling this the limbic lockdown effect. So let's talk a little about the limbic system. So the limbic system is the emotional and survival command center of the brain, the part responsible for processing emotions, forming memories, triggering instinctual responses like fight, flight, or freeze. It's made up of key structures, including the amygdala. This is sort of like the brain's fear detector. It scans for threats and activates fight or flight responses when danger is detected. The hippocampus, this is the memory processor. It connects past experiences to present emotions, which is why certain triggers can cause deep emotional reactions. The hypothalamus, this is the bodily response manager. It controls stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, dictating how the body physically reacts to stress and emotions. Now, when an avoidant experiences emotional intimacy, their limbic system mistakes it for danger, and this activates essentially like a full body breakdown. The avoidant may not consciously feel fear, but their brain and body react as if abandonment is already happening. The amygdala sounds the alarm. Something feels off. This is too close. The hypothalamus floods the body with stress hormones, fatigue, nausea, tension. The hippocampus connects it to the past wounds. Last time I let someone in, I got hurt. Run. This is why deactivation feels so automatic for avoidants. Their body responds before their rational brain can even catch up. And this is what makes the limbic lockdown effect one of the most powerful breaking points an avoidant can experience. All right, but what does this look like in reality? So let's say you've broken up with an avoidant, but a part of you still really wants to reconnect. So you do what's recommended. You go slow, you don't push, you give them space, and at first, it works. They start responding more frequently. You go from occasional check-ins to talking every day. Eventually, the conversations get deeper, and then one night you open up about something meaningful. Nothing crazy, just a real vulnerable moment. And they engage. For the first time in a while, it actually feels like connection. You think, this is progress. But what you don't realize is that in the background, their limbic system has slowly been activating. Each emotional conversation, that's a warning sign. Each moment of closeness, a threat detection trigger. Each feeling of attachment creeping back in, a red flag to their subconscious. Now, at first, they don't even notice it's happening, but then suddenly, they do. It could be the next morning when they wake up and feel strangely off. It could be during your next conversation when something small feels overwhelmingly suffocating. Their limbic system goes into full lockdown. They feel trapped. They feel exhausted. They feel like they need to escape. They don't know why, but their body is telling them to run, and so they do. Maybe they disappear for a few days. Maybe they send a cold, detached text that feels like it came from a completely different person. Maybe they even pick a fight out of nowhere, blaming you for feelings they don't understand. Now, to you, it feels like a betrayal, but to them, it feels like survival. This is the limbic lockdown effect in action. It's not that they don't care about you. is that their brain is misreading connection as danger. And unless they become aware of this pattern, it will happen again and again. All right, so let's move on to the final tip of our triangle, the identity fracture. So if the phantom bond paradox shakes their sense of control and the limbic lockdown forces them to confront emotions they don't understand, then the identity fracture is the moment when an avoidant realizes they don't actually know who they are without avoidance. So for an avoidant, independence isn't just a preference, it's a core part of their identity. They tell themselves, I don't need anyone, I prefer being alone, I'm just not emotional. But what happens when that identity stops making sense? All right, this is my world famous avoidant death wheel. I've talked about it in so many videos at this point that if you don't know what it is, that's on you. But there's something about stages 7 and 8 that has always fascinated me. Something happens there that causes an avoidant to reset. All right, so stage 7 is the self-pity and false resignation stage. Now, at this point, the avoidant has literally pushed everyone away. They tell themselves it's what they wanted, but then they start to feel it. The creeping loneliness, the quiet realization that maybe they weren't as in control as they thought. The first flicker of regret. But here's the thing, avoidants don't like regret. Instead of processing it, what they're going to do is shift into stage 8, which is the identity reset, or aka the identity fracture. This is the breaking point. This is the moment where they can't run anymore. The moment where avoidance no longer feels like a choice, it feels like a cycle. This is where they tell themselves, relationships are just too much for me. I'm better off alone. People always leave me anyway. And on the surface, this seems like a final answer. But underneath, it's actually the start of a fracture. Because now, they aren't just avoiding people, they're avoiding the truth about themselves. Now the question is, do they wake up to it, or do they let the wheel keep spinning? Well, ladies and gentlemen, today I'm adding new lore to the death wheel. Most of the time, an avoidant's identity remains intact. They'll start the death wheel over again, either with you or with someone else. But let's say, for the sake of argument, they go through 10 revolutions of the wheel. Each time, they're following the same pattern. They meet someone new. They feel the intoxicating stage 2 high, the illusion that they found that perfect person who will finally make relationships feel easy. They start to pull away. They deactivate. Then they're happy. And then they convince themselves they're better off alone. They feel the creeping regret at stage 7, but they'll push it down. And then stage 8. This is that moment where they have to reconcile what they've done. But instead of facing it, they hit reset and they start the cycle again, and then again, and then again. But here's the thing. Every time they go through stage 8, something fractures. It's small at first, a tiny doubt, a flicker of discomfort, a whisper of, why does this keep happening? But by the 10th revolution, it's no longer just a fracture. It's a full-on break. They aren't just alone. They're literally so alone that it's unbearable. They aren't just in pain, they are in so much pain that avoidance itself stops working. And suddenly, for the first time ever, they are confronted with the truth that no matter how many times they start over, they keep ending up in the same place. That avoidance didn't protect them. It just literally it kept them trapped. That running didn't stop them from getting hurt. It just delayed the pain until it became so big they couldn't ignore it. This is the identity fracture. And once they see it, they can't unsee it. Psychologically, what's happening here is really fascinating. This is Leon Festinger. He's the man that founded the concept of cognitive dissonance, which is basically an ideal that the psychological stress that occurs when a person holds two contradictory beliefs or behaviors at the same time. So for avoidance, the core contradiction will look something like this. Belief number 1 is I don't need deep and emotional connections. And belief number 2 is, so why do I keep feeling lonely and repeating this same cycle? Now, at first, they resolve this conflict by rationalizing their behaviors. The relationship just wasn't right. I'm being smothered, or I'm just not built for this. But with each cycle, the rationalization becomes harder to maintain. They have more and more evidence that they are the common denominator. The loneliness intensifies, but they can't blame it on their ex anymore. So eventually they reach stage 8 so many times that the cognitive dissonance becomes unbearable. That's when the fracture happens. They no longer have an excuse. The weight of the contradiction snaps them in half. Now, let's take a look at our triangle. This whole video is about understanding the breaking point for avoidance. With the phantom bond, that breaking point was when they realized the version of you they kept in their mind no longer exists. With the limbic lockdown effect, that breaking point was when emotional intimacy triggers a full-body survival response, making them push away the very thing they crave. And with the identity fracture, that breaking point was when they cycle through avoidance so many times that their self-concept snaps, forcing them to confront a harsh truth. Maybe I've been lying to myself this whole time. Now, each point of the triangle represents a different kind of breakdown. And the question you're probably wondering is, will a breakdown lead them to coming back to you? And the short answer is, it depends. Just because an avoidant breaks down doesn't mean they'll suddenly become self-aware, heal their wounds, and come running back. Here's what usually happens at each breaking point. So you have the phantom bond paradox. This is sort of like nostalgia and curiosity. This is actually the most common breakdown that leads to an avoidant reaching out. They realize you're no longer the person they kept in their mind, and it creates an emotional gap they want to fill. But here's the catch. Most of the time, they aren't coming back for you. They're coming back for the comfort of their old illusion. If you've truly changed, they might pull away again when they see that their phantom bond no longer works. And then you have the limbic lockdown effect. This is sort of like deactivation and self-sabotage. This is actually the least likely breakdown to lead to them coming back, at least not right away. Avoidants don't reach out during this stage. They're too busy fleeing. However, after the storm settles, they may feel guilt for how they treated you and attempt to reconnect. If they come back from this, it's often indirect. Casual check-ins, random messages, excuses to talk. But unless they become aware of their own patterns, they will eventually repeat this deactivation strategy again. And then we come to the big kahuna, the identity fracture. This is true regret, but not necessarily always action. This is the rarest breakdown, but also the most meaningful. If they reach this stage, they are forced to confront themselves in a way they never have before. Some avoidants will reach out, but not in a casual breadcrumbing way. They might express true vulnerability. Others, they won't reach out at all. Not because they don't regret losing you, but because they feel too ashamed, too broken, or too unsure of how to fix things. If an avoidant ever permanently changes, it starts here. But that journey is one they have to take on their own. So, will they come back? Well, they might, but the real question isn't will they? It's if they do, will it be different this time? Because unless they've truly confronted their own patterns, they aren't coming back as a changed person. They're just coming back to start the death wheel all over again. And if you've truly grown past the version of yourself that tolerated their avoidance, well, you might not want them back anymore.